Okay, we'll get started. So good afternoon, everyone. Um, we're in a fascinating, almost bewildering moment in the world of TA and talent acquisition. On one hand, recruiters are facing immense pressure, often hundreds of CVs for a single role. Budgets are flatlining, and there's rising legal scrutiny. And on the other hand, we're surrounded by headlines and vendor promises of AI transforming hiring, offering to deliver shortlists in 30 seconds. And the core premise of these AI solutions, particularly those using large language models, is that they can bring efficiency and perhaps fairness to the screening process. But there's a critical, often unspoken assumption that these AI tools are at least as consistent and reliable as the human recruiters that they aim to assist, if not more so. And that's the assumption that I decided to put to the test in my field experiment, the large language model, the LLM Reality Check. Um, we, I, I didn't want an academic lab test for this. I wanted to see what happens when off-the-shelf commercial large language models, especially some of the top three out there, ChatGPT, Gemini, Grok, are used exactly as a busy, perhaps quite naive recruiter might use them, with a very standard prompt pasted into a browser to screen a pool of actual anonymized HR business partner resumes for a real job description from Meta. And what I found, quite frankly, was startling. My big idea in one sentence is that these off-the-shelf LLMs screen CVs like overconfident interns. They're fast and smooth, but shockingly inconsistent. Over 300 head-to-head screening runs, I saw these leading models agree on just 14% of their daily top 10 shortlists. They would reshuffle identical resumes by an average of plus or minus 2.5 ranked places overnight, with one candidate dramatically swinging from 10th place to first place in 48 hours. Perhaps most concerning for TA, 55% of the pool of CVs was never shortlisted at all, effectively vanishing without an audit trail. And their explanations, the justification bullet points, they just recycled the same phrases 96% of the time. Now, I know that human recruiters aren't perfectly consistent either. And my accompanying report for this presentation benchmarks on human inter-rater reliability, and I'll talk about that later, which hovers around a kappa of 0.5, shows recruiters flipping on 60% of good CVs. But the LLM overlap that I observed was significantly lower, around the 0.14 mark, with much higher volatility. So today, I'm going to walk you through the experiment, how I designed the practicality of it, the numbers, the detailed findings from that experiment, including how they stack up against human benchmarks, the good, the bad, and the ugly, what LLMs can safely do, where the cracks are starting to appear, and where serious risks could land you in court. We're already seeing that. The implications, what this means for hiring leaders, for policymakers, for vendors, for the research community, and crucially trying to give you a path forward. Some concrete steps, including some checklists, some smarter strategies that can help convert these rogue interns into more reliable co-pilots. So my goal here isn't going to be to dismiss LLMs. They're far too useful to ignore. It's to provide some data-driven reality checks so that as an industry, professionals, researchers, analysts alike, we can navigate this new kind of terrain of AI with our eyes wide open. We can deploy AI at speed, but govern it with risk. Okay, let's dive in. So for those that don't know me, my name is Martyn Redstone. I've been in the technology space for 26 years. The last 19 years, I've been in the recruitment industry, But for the last 8 years, I've been really focused on working on conversational and generative AI. So pre-chat GPT, been doing it for almost 9 years now, actually. I'm currently the chair of the World Summit on Conversational AI, held in Berlin on an annual basis since 2003. 23, that should say. Makes me far too old. Nerd credentials. I have a bachelor's in computer science, and before I was in recruitment, I was a cellular communications engineer, building some of the original mobile phone networks in this country. I currently am the founder of 3 different businesses, but they all come together under the same helm. Eunomia HR, which used to be known as PeopleBots, that is now an AI in recruitment, governance, and compliance advisory business. Hence this research that I'm presenting today. Genesis, which is my AI workforce readiness assessment and upskilling platform, and also BotJobs, which is my conversational AI job board. But altogether, I'm trying to bring those all together to, as it says there, quite cheesily, empowering the human side of AI transformation. Okay, so we're all keenly aware of the intense environment that TA professionals are operating in today. I mentioned it earlier. It's truly a genuine pressure cooker. Recruiters are drowning in applications, hundreds upon hundreds of CVs per role. Budgets are reducing or staying flat, and there's more and more legal risks arising. So we think about that for a moment. A relentless flood of applications, often hundreds for each individual position, relentlessly hitting your desks or your application tracking system, your ATS. This incredible volume needs to be managed effectively, often with resources that simply aren't increasing as budgets reduce or stay flat. And woven through all of this is an ever-growing critical concern around compliance and fairness, especially as those regulations are coming into play and legal risks are starting to arise. So that's demanding ever greater scrutiny. It's truly demanding. It's a truly demanding professional reality. And it's into this very challenging landscape that AI is stepping forward, offering what appears to be genuinely powerful solutions. We're seeing compelling marketing from vendors, the bold claims that AI can shortlist for you in 30 seconds, the promise of speed, of cutting through the sheer volume of to find top candidates almost instantly. It's incredibly attractive. It suggests a way to alleviate these immense pressures, enhance day-to-day efficiency, and perhaps even bring a new level of verifiable objectivity to the hiring process. It's a future that many in recruitment are understandably eager to embrace. So we have this backdrop of intense recruiter pressure on one side and the dazzling promise of AI-driven solutions on the other. But within many of these vendor pitches, there's a powerful, often unspoken assumption. When vendors highlight capabilities like an AI shortlist in 30 seconds, they're implying that the robot is at least as stable as a human, if not significantly more so. And it's this core implication of reliability and consistency. It's truly foundational to the trust that we might place in those systems for such a critical task as selecting talent. This led directly to the central question underpinning my research. Is this assumption of AI stability actually valid when these off-the-shelf tools are put to the test in a realistic everyday setting? And I tested that claim. To investigate this formally, I established an experimental hypothesis, which you see on the screen, designated as H.A.I.R, our AI reliability test. This hypothesis posits that commercial LLMs will produce stable and agreeing top 10 lists from identical inputs. The logic here is straightforward. If these advanced AI models can't consistently and agreeably rank the same set of resumes when given the exact same inputs day after day, their core utility for standalone automated screening is fundamentally undermined. The report is quite blunt about the considerable stakes involved here. Sorry, my phone's buzzing up, just completely and utterly distracting me. The report is quite blunt about the considerable stakes involved here. If the hypothesis fails, then hands-off commercial LLM CV screening fails with it. So this brings us directly to my study, titled the LLM Reality Check. This was conceived and executed as a field experiment, designed not as an abstract academic exercise in a lab, but as a practical real-world test of how these widely available large language models actually perform when faced with a common high-stakes recruitment task. I really wanted to see what happens when the theoretical capabilities meet everyday application. The core finding, the big idea in one sentence that truly encapsulates the essence of the results, is displayed prominently on your screen right now. Off-the-shelf large language models screen CVs like overconfident interns. Fast and smooth, but shockingly inconsistent. This analogy of the overconfident intern really gets to the heart of what I observed. These systems are really fast, and their output is often incredibly fluent, sounding highly convincing, polished, and authoritative. However, as I discovered, beneath that impressive surface lies a surprising and rather concerning level of underlying inconsistency. As one of my main conclusions puts it, I measured the dream and I found the glitch. The dream, of course, is the promise of recruiter-grade consistency at machine speed. The glitch is the fundamentally unreliable that I systematically uncovered. Over the next few slides, I'm going to walk you through precisely how I arrived at this overconfident intern conclusion by first detailing the methodology and then presenting the key data that supports it. So, how exactly did I conduct this reality check? The methodology was intentionally designed to simulate how a typical, perhaps busy, resource-constrained recruiter might use these widely available AI tools right now. I selected 3 flagship chatbots for the head-to-head comparisons: ChatGPT 4.0 from OpenAI, Gemini 2.0 Flash from Google, and Grok 3 from H.A.I.R. And crucially, I interacted with them using their default browser UIs, not through the more complex APIs, which might allow for greater control. The prompt I gave to each model was consistent. It was the exact prompt that LinkedIn AI gurus will tell recruiters to paste into a browser. It was a detailed 270-word virtual recruiter prompt. And again, with the accompanying report that I'll send out in due course, I share it in there. The core task for these AI models was to screen the data set, which consisted of 109 anonymized HR business partner resumes that I got from a publicly available data set repository. They were all in English and they were global candidates. They were the AI was screening these against a real-world, publicly available HR business partner role that was advertised at Meta. And to ensure that I captured variability, I ran these tests consistently over 10 weekdays from the 6th of May until the 20th of May. And this process generated 30 head-to-head resume screens each day, leading to quite a substantial data set of 300 ranked CV instances and 900 justification bullet points that I was able to subsequently analyze. Now, in the spirit of complete transparency and rigorous research, it's really important for me to be clear about the specific scope and the acknowledged limitations of this particular study. These are all detailed in the report again. These aren't presented as a weakness of the study, but rather deliberate choices made to focus my investigation squarely on a common user experience. First, as already mentioned in the methodology, I exclusively use browser UIs, not APIs. This choice means that I was subject to unknown non-zero temperature settings that are often inherent in these public-facing interfaces. Consequently, the deterministic behavior of these models, essentially how they might perform with their creative randomness minimized, remains untested within this specific experiment. Second, I think it's important to note that my findings are based on one prompt and one job description. This means that the results and conclusions that I draw only hold for that single role, the HRBP role, and that prompt style. I'm not making any broader claims beyond that specific, however quite common use case. Third, this study represents a snapshot in time. The models were dated May 2025, and we all know that these technologies are evolving at an incredibly rapid pace. There were new models coming out while I was doing this experiment, but I kept the same model. And finally, I used English-only data for this experiment, therefore making no multilingual claims either. Crucially, for me, these constraints are mirroring that naive recruiter scenario that I set out to probe. The main aim here is to understand the current reality for users who are employing these tools in a very straightforward, easily accessible manner, rather than under highly controlled lab-style conditions. Okay, let's get to the exciting stuff, shall we? So let's move on to the core results of the experiment. And the very first headline statistic that I uncovered addresses a really fundamental question. When given the exact same task, the exact same list of resumes, and the exact same job description, do these different leading models actually agree with each other on who the top candidates are? The answer, as you can see highlighted quite starkly on this slide, is a surprisingly low 14%. Across all of our daily tests, where each of the three models, ChatGPT, Gemini, and Grok, selected their top 10 candidates, they collectively agreed on only 14% of common CVs in their daily lists. This indicates a very small intersection of agreement. Now, why does this low agreement matter so importantly, so profoundly? Well, it means that two AI recruiters would differ 4 times out of 5. Imagine that in practice. You could give the same screening task to 3 different AI platforms and get largely different shortlists. This immediately raises significant questions about the objectivity and reliability of using any single off-the-shelf model as a definitive recruitment gatekeeper. If the choice of AI model so drastically changes the outcome, the consistency of the entire process comes into question. To provide more granularity on this, the diagram here details the pairwise model agreements, averaged over 10 days of the experiment. So I found that ChatGPT 4o and Gemini Flash exhibited the highest agreement between them, sharing an average of 4 CVs out of their respective top 10 lists, which translates to a 40% agreement. However, this level of agreement dropped quite significantly when Grok 3 was involved. ChatGPT and Grok shared only 1.3 CVs on average, or just 13%. And the agreement between Gemini and Grok was even lower, sharing an average of 0.8 CVs at 8%. This significant variability in candidate selection between different leading models for the exact same task is a critical finding of my research. Now, beyond the disagreement between the different models, my next critical finding addresses a perhaps even more fundamental question. Can an individual large language model even agree with itself when presented with the exact same task on different days? And this is what's termed rank volatility. The headline figure here, which you can see prominently displayed, is that on average, these models, these sophisticated models, reshuffled identical resumes by plus or minus 2.5 ranks overnight. This is the average daily rank volatility that I observed. Measured quantitatively as plus or minus 2.5 places a day. Now, what does this mean in very practical terms for a recruiter relying on these kind of tools? It means yesterday's number 2 can be tomorrow's number 5. And this can happen with absolutely no changes whatsoever to the candidate resume or to the job description that they're being assessed against. To delve a little bit deeper into this intramodel consistency, my accompanying report provides a more detailed breakdown of each of the 3 models that were tested. ChatGPT, which resaw or re-ranked 17 distinct CVs at least twice in the top 10 across the 10 experiment days. The mean volatility or its average rank volatility was 2.62 places. Gemini, which resaw 18 CVs under similar conditions, had an average rank volatility of 2.27 places, and Grok, which only resaw 6 CVs 2 or more times in its top 10 selection, nonetheless exhibited an average volatility of 2.38 places. So this consistent finding that resumes can shift significantly in their rankings by the exact same model on different days underscores a fundamental challenge to their current reliability for consistent, repeatable talent evaluation. If the same system cannot produce stable judgments over short periods, its trustworthiness as a standalone, objective decision maker is seriously compromised. So while the average rank volatility of around plus or minus 2.5 places, which we just discussed, is already a significant concern for consistency, my experiment also uncovered instances of much more extreme and frankly quite startling shifts in judgment by these models. This brings me to my third headline finding, which I've termed the maximum swing, the max swing. The most striking and illustrative example of this phenomenon, as highlighted here, was when Gemini promoted a resume from number 10 to number 1 in 48 hours. So let's let that sink in for just a moment. A candidate who was deemed by Gemini to be just barely making the same top 10 shortlist in one day, ranked at number 10, was then identified by the very same AI model as the absolute top candidate, the number 1 pick, just 2 days later. It's important to stress that there was absolutely no changes to that candidate's resume, no alterations to the job description, and no new instructions given to the model. It was simply a different day leading to a completely different and dramatically opposite assessment from the same AI model. Now, why is this specific instance so critically important to highlight? Because this represents a complete reversal of judgment. This isn't just a minor reshuffle or a slight adjustment in the rankings. It's the AI fundamentally contradicting its own previous assessment in the most dramatic way possible. This single stark data point vividly illustrates the potential for extreme unreliability in these systems when used for such evaluative tasks. If a model can swing from bottom of the shortlist to the very top so drastically and inexplicably, it severely undermines any confidence that we might reasonably have in its ability to make consistent, reasoned, and ultimately fair evaluations. This kind of extreme swing powerfully highlights the most unpredictable facet of the volatility that we observed in my study. So moving on to another deeply concerning discovery from my experiment, my fourth headline statistic reveals what I've termed the hidden talent problem. I found that a staggering 55% of resumes were never shortlisted by any of the 3 AI models across any of the top of the 10 experiment days. AI ignored 55% of the talent pool entirely. Now, let's think about the profound implications of that figure for a moment. More than half of the candidates in our qualified pool, over 50 individuals in this specific data set of 109 resumes, were effectively invisible to these AI screeners throughout the entire experiment. These candidates vanish without an audit trail. This is not only a significant issue from a talent discovery perspective, potentially missing out on some excellent hires, but it also raises some serious questions from a compliance and fairness standpoint. This slide graphically illustrates this phenomenon very clearly. So why does this happen? What's the mechanism behind this large-scale oversight? Well, my analysis suggests that models stop searching once they hit a top 10 quota, leaving 55% of resumes unread beyond the header. It appears to be what I'd call an algorithmic blind spot that hides talent and can embed systematic bias. In essence, the AI seems to be optimizing its process to efficiently fill its quota of 10 names, rather than exhaustively and fairly evaluating every single candidate present in the pool. The accompanying report further details this distribution for those candidates who were seen at least once. For instance, 25 CVs made only one appearance in a shortlist across all 300 instances, while only a very small handful of just 7 CVs appeared frequently, between 16 and 20 times. This highly unequal distribution of visibility, combined with over half the talent pool remaining entirely unseen, paints a very troubling picture for the promise of fairness and thoroughness in the LLM-driven resume screening as it currently stands. My fifth key finding from the experiment delves into the quality and the nature of the explanations that these AI models are providing for the shortlisting decisions. As part of the prompt, the LLMs were asked to provide a brief justification of 2 or 3 bullet points for each selection that they made for the top 10 candidates. What I discovered when analysing these nearly 900 justification bullets was quite revealing about the underlying process. The truly striking headline statistic here is that their rationale bullets recycled the same 3 phrases 96% of the time. That's an incredibly high rate of repetition across different candidates, different models, and different days. Imagine as a recruiter reading the justifications for supposedly distinct top candidates day after day and encountering the exact same phrases over and over again. This phenomenon is what I refer to in the bad section of our good, bad, and ugly analysis as copy and paste insight. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. The report that I'll send out critically notes that these identical justifications signal no deep reasoning on the part of the AI. Instead of providing some unique, tailored insights that are genuinely specific to each candidate's experience, skills, and qualifications detailed in their resume, the models are consistently tending to fall back on a very limited set of generic boilerplate statements. This extremely high level of repetition in the explanatory text strongly suggests a superficial level of engagement with the actual resume content. It implies that the models are not performing a deep contextual analysis of each document, but are maybe identifying a few common keywords or surface level patterns and then generating, at best, a statistically common justification. This lack of diverse and specific reasoning in their explanation further erodes that confidence in the depth of the understanding and the true validity of their selection. Now, a quite critical but fair question arises from these findings about large language model instability. How do these inconsistencies in AI actually compare to human recruiters? After all, we can widely acknowledge that human decision making and hiring isn't perfectly consistent either. Let's set the scene. Imagine 3 human recruiters in 3 cubicles. You expect some disagreement, but at least some overlap on some obvious stars. Our AI recruiters, they can't even agree on 2 names out of 10, and each changes their mind midweek. So to provide a more data-driven context for this comparison, I reviewed several published studies on human recruiter consistency. So here's a couple of key examples. Kick Résumé carried out a study in 2023. It was quite extensive. It analysed 12,000 resume to job description pairings, and it found an inter-rater reliability measured by something called kappa of 0.49. This suggests a moderate level of agreement between different human recruiters. Interestingly, this study also noted a considerable intra-rater variability. That's a recruiter agreeing with themselves over time, finding that recruiters flipped on their assessment of good CVs about 60% of the time when re-evaluating them. The overall takeaway from Kick Résumé was that human consistency is moderate. So yes, the evidence clearly shows that human recruiters are themselves variable and exhibit inconsistencies. However, when we draw a comparison with the large language model performance that I observed, that overlap of just 14%, it's half the human agreement band. Particularly if we consider that kick resume kappa of approximately 0.5 as indicative of a general human tendency in broader assessments. Furthermore, large language models in our study exhibited roughly twice the volatility of humans when we consider their day-to-day rank changes against those reported human figures. So, my take from this is that human recruiters remain noisy, but still outscore the AI on stability. Published studies, peg human agreement around a kappa of 0.5. Our trio of LLM recruiters lands at 0.14. Therefore, while neither humans nor current off-the-shelf large language models are perfectly consistent, in this specific direct comparison, the large language models demonstrated a significantly lower agreement amongst themselves and a higher day-to-day rate of instability in their rankings than what published research generally suggests for human recruitment professionals. So, having now established the significant inconsistencies that we observed in off-the-shelf large language model performance, and having contextualized that with human baseline data, it's very important to present a balanced perspective. My research isn't about dismissing large language models entirely. It's far from that. It's about fostering a clear-eyed understanding of their current capabilities and, crucially, their current limitations, so they can be used wisely and responsibly. So let's start appropriately with the good, safe uses today. Because despite the profound issues with reliability and consistency that I highlighted for standalone decision making, these AI models, these powerful AI models, do offer some tangible benefits when they're applied to specific, well-suited tasks under the right conditions. The first clear advantage is what I've termed the speed blitz. These models can process vast amounts of text-based information incredibly quickly. In my own tests, they were able to assess all 109 CVs in less than 1 minute. This sheer speed in initial processing and data ingestion is something that human recruiters simply cannot match on that scale, and it can be a significant time saver for initial broad sweeps of large candidate pools. Secondly, these LLMs demonstrate excellent template discipline. When prompted correctly, they can produce clean tables for an ATS upload. This means they can take potentially unstructured resume data from various formats and organize it into consistently formatted outputs. This structured data can be incredibly helpful for efficient data entry, better organization, and ensuring that information is correctly passed into an ATS, which is often quite a manual and time-consuming task. This consistency in formatting output is a definite strength. And thirdly, LLMs are very capable at generating first draft bullets. These are the initial summaries or key points that can be extracted from a resume. So whilst my earlier findings highlighted issues with the depth and originality of those justifications when used for ranking, the ability to quickly generate these preliminary summaries can actually help humans skim through resumes more efficiently. They can effectively act as a first pass filter or a summarization tool, highlighting potential areas of interest for a human reviewer to then explore in much more detail. So for speed, initial structuring of information, and first draft summaries, there are clear positives that we have to acknowledge. Okay, so how about the bad? When large language models, they certainly offer benefits, like I mentioned, in speed, structuring, and what have you. But my experiment also uncovered significant downsides, and these become particularly problematic when these tools are relied upon for more critical evaluation tasks, especially when applied at scale across numerous candidates or multiple hiring processes. So this brings us to my section called the bad cracks that widen at scale. These issues that might seem like minor quirks in isolated instances, they can quickly escalate into systematic problems when amplified. First on this list is what I've termed ranking roulette. Now, I already touched upon the concerning rank volatility findings, and this point crystallizes the impact. I observed plus or minus 3 place swings in candidate ranking from one day to the next by the exact same model with no change to the input data. This isn't just a small statistical fluctuation that one might expect. It means that a candidate you might have considered a strong contender at, say, rank number 2 could inexplicably drop to number 5 or vice versa, literally overnight. This level of unpredictability fundamentally turns the shortlist processing into something resembling a game of chance rather than a consistent, reliable evaluation, making it incredibly difficult to trust the stability of AI's judgment over time. Second, my research highlighted the issue of the vendor lottery. So as my earlier findings on model-to-model agreement demonstrated, different leading models can produce markedly different shortlists, even when given the exact identical candidate pool and job description. So if you switch LLM model, you effectively can switch your shortlist. And this means that your top ranked candidates, the individuals who got serviced for review, could be entirely dependent on which AI provider or specific model you happen to be using on any given day, rather than purely on the inherent quality of the candidate themselves. There's often no consistent, discernible business logic that explains why one vendor's top 10 is so different from another's, making strategic and consistent talent acquisition very, very challenging if you rely solely on these tools without further checks. Finally, there's the persistent issue of the copy-paste insight. As I touched upon when discussing my findings about boilerplate explanations, the prevalence of identical justifications signals no deep reasoning. When LLMs overwhelmingly are recycling the same few generic phrases to justify their selections for widely different candidates, it means that recruiters or hiring managers that are using these tools learn very little that is new or genuinely insightful about the specific nuanced strengths or potential weaknesses of those individuals. The process risks becoming a superficial exercise in text generation, hindering rather than helping a deeper, more informed understanding of the available talent pool. Now, we're arriving at the most critical part of this section, which I've termed the ugly. And these are the aspects of current off-the-shelf LLM performance in resume screening that carries the most significant potential risks. Kind of issues that, as bluntly stated on here, could genuinely land you in court. These aren't minor operational inconveniences. They touch upon fundamental legal, ethical, and reputational obligations for any organization. First, and perhaps most alarmingly from a compliance perspective, is the severe problem of the invisible disqualifiers. As my research found, a shocking 55% of resumes were unseen by the AI models throughout the testing period. This isn't about potentially missing out on top talent. The report clearly and directly states that this level of oversight, where candidates vanish without an audit trail, effectively violates EU AI Act obligations and GDPR principles, particularly concerning fairness, transparency, and the right to an explanation in automated decision making. So when a system renders more than half the applicant pool effectively invisible without any discernible, auditable process, it raises some really profound questions about due process and non-discrimination, a massive compliance vulnerability. Ooh. So second, there's the immense challenging of attempting to defend the indefensible. As I demonstrated with the findings on rank volatility, max swings, these volatile rankings lack stable criteria. Imagine trying to explain to a regulatory body or even a court of law why a specific candidate was ranked number 10 by your AI system on Monday and then assessed as the number 1 top pick by the very same AI system on Wednesday, with absolutely no change in application details or job requirements, or why a different AI model has produced wildly different shortlists for exactly the same role. Without those clear, consistent, and stable criteria underpinning the automated decisions, building a robust and defensible case for the fairness or objectivity of the process becomes nearly impossible. And finally, I have to address this persistent issue of vendor hype versus reality. Now more than ever, it's really, really easy to build screening tools that are just wrappers for large language models, and we're often presented with compelling claims from those startup vendors, such as the promise of 80% of time has been saved by implementing our AI in your recruitment process. However, as I've tried to highlight, these very, very bold claims frequently and conveniently ignore accuracy and legal costs. The significant trade-offs in accuracy, the lack of reliability, and crucially, the potential for substantial legal costs and severe reputational damage, must be factored in. Any perceived time saving can be very quickly overshadowed by the considerable cost of dealing with the fallout from an unreliable, unfair, or non-compliant automated hiring process. Okay, so very quickly, now that we've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly aspects of that performance, there's a natural and quite important question that arises. Why do these models, these sophisticated and powerful AI models, exhibit such concerning behaviors like high volatility, low agreement, and boilerplate explanations? So to get a glimpse under the hood and understand this a bit better, let's go over some very well-established limitations inherent in current LLM architectures, drawing from very significant existing AI research. So first, let's think about that post hoc explanation. There was a 2023 study from Anthropic, the people that make Claude, called Measuring Faithfulness in Chain of Thought Reasoning, which found compelling evidence that large language models often invent rationales that sound good but don't match their actual internal computation. In fact, their research indicates, somewhat counterintuitively, that the larger models are often less faithful in their step-by-step reasoning processes, with a significant 30 to 60% being fabricated storytelling, rather than genuine reflections of their internal processing. The direct relevance of this to our findings is quite clear and very significant. Large language model justifications for ranking a CV may be fluent and convincing, but ultimately constitute untrustworthy evidence. This aligns quite well with our own observation that we've gone over of confident yet generic and highly recycled rationale bullets. Second, the complex concept of fragmented subcircuits, really technical piece here, but it characterizes the internal reasoning pathways within these large language models. If we take a look at some of the extensive work like this year's survey by Lin et al. On mechanistic interpretability, so that with my teeth back in, that synthesized over 250 research papers with a prevailing idea that real tasks are often handled by many tiny and quite sometimes overlapping circuits within a neural network. And so it's basically a lottery over which path a task takes. So there isn't always a single coherent overarching flow for the reasoning of a complex task. And that really shows that plausible technical explanation of why the exact same model might rank the exact same CV differently on different days. There might be a slightly different microcircuit activated. Third, and finally, we've got this persuasive issue of reward hacking or shortcut optimization. Research, suggests and discusses various reinforcement learning failure models, and these studies show that LLMs learn to mimic style, spoof tests, or sometimes become overcautiously refusing of tasks to avoid penalties. So what we think here is that with the resume screening, it may optimize for any plausible top 10 rather than faithfully evaluating every CV. Like I mentioned earlier, it could explain why such a large proportion, that 55% of our talent pool, was never shortlisted. The model likely found a shortcut to fulfill the pick your top 10 instruction without needing to process the entire data set deeply. It's really important that we understand these underlying architectural and behavioral limitations of large language models, because they suggest that the issues of inconsistency and superficiality, can't even say that word, that we observed are not just superficial bugs that can be easily patched, but are to some significant extent characteristics of how large language model architecture operates for these kind of complex, nuanced tasks. Okay, so the findings from this experiment, particularly that low model-to-model agreement and the significant rank volatility and that hidden talent, they're not just interesting data points, they've got really some profound and immediate implications for various groups of people who are involved with this hiring ecosystem that's going through massive change. So I've outlined some of these critical implications and suggest some clear and immediate actions for some key stakeholders. And you can see that summarized in this slide. I've identified 4 primary groups. So HR and TA heads. For leaders in organizations who are responsible for the hiring strategy, the primary and most urgent recommendation is to treat large language models as co-pilots, not as gatekeepers. Means leveraging their undeniable speed for initial sifting, for summarizing, for drafting communication. However, it also means ensuring that a qualified human professional is always in the loop for any decision that actually challenges a candidate's status, determines their progression through a hiring funnel, or leads, more importantly, to a rejection. You can't allow them to autonomously make critical shortlisting or rejection decisions. It's simply too risky, especially from a quality of hire perspective, from a fairness perspective, and certainly from a legal standpoint. For policymakers and regulators, my findings absolutely support the current cautious stance that many regulatory bodies are taking regarding the use of AI in employment decisions. I strongly recommend to keep them as high-risk classifications in things like the EU AI Act. I know there's a lot of pushback on that, but my study here shows that they should absolutely be high risk. I'd advocate to maintain that. This is quite crucial for policymakers. We need to ask them to demand reproducibility proofs from vendors who are offering these tools. Show that volatility, show that lack of volatility, show where it's agreeing, where it's not agreeing. Some of those things that we've shown in this study. Ask them to provide that data. And going on to the vendors, the findings here present a clear call for significantly greater transparency, accountability, and a more responsible approach to product development and marketing. I'm really urging vendors as an immediate action to publish overlap and volatility dashboards for their models. Their customers, the HR professionals, the TA professionals using these tools, they deserve to know empirically how consistent their chosen AI tool is, both in its own internal judgment over time, but when compared to other models or even human evaluators. We also need to understand version pins on their APIs and other such things that I mentioned in the report as well. Ultimately, if the TA industry is to mature and gain lasting trust, vendors need to move beyond the current cycle of hype and the unsubstantial claims, and instead provide empirical, verifiable evidence in their tools reliability, fairness, and actual real-world effectiveness. And finally, we consider the implications for the research community. My study, I believe, highlights an urgent need for a shift in focus within academic and industry research concerning large language models and AI evaluation. The immediate action that I propose is to build benchmarking for consistency and explainability and not just accuracy. That's all we tend to focus on. Okay. Now, for the last few minutes, I just want to give you that path forward, really, so that we know what we're doing. So the findings we've discussed so far: low agreement, high volatility, hidden talent, boilerplate explanations, they paint a very cautionary picture. We've highlighted some significant and fundamental challenges in the current generation of off-the-shelf LLMs when applied to resume screening. But like I said right at the beginning, this isn't about dismissing the technology. It's about fostering that clear-eyed, evidence-based approach to the responsible adoption and use of them. So the goal here is to find ways to transform these tools. I want to move them from what I've characterized as that rogue intern, that undeniably fast, impressively fluent, but ultimately unreliable and prone to overconfidence, into a controlled co-pilot. So how do we achieve this transformation? So I think that a practical path forward exists, but it's human in the loop, machine learning ops heavy, and audit first. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, first of all, one of the most accessible and powerful levers that we have for influencing how large language models behave is, of course, the prompt itself and the instructions that we give them. So my main experiment by design used a single fixed naive recruiter prompt to establish a baseline for that performance. However, looking forward, I pose a critical question: could smarter prompts have steadied the ship? And that's something that I'll be looking at in the future. And I've got several of those ideas listed in my report, and here's 3 of them that we can talk through as well. So while all these strategies require quite rigorous and empirical testing to validate their effectiveness, for me, they do represent concrete, actionable approaches to potentially enhancing that reliability, consistency, or transparency by using more sophisticated prompts. Beyond just refining the prompts, though, if we're truly serious about integrating LLMs into hiring workflows, we need a robust operational framework. And this is where the discipline of machine learning ops becomes critically important. So as you can see here, there's a few things. I've got a whole checklist in the report. Here's 4 of the most important ones. Version pinning. We want to make sure that we know what model is being used and pin that model, because as soon as we have another model, we might have changes to the output. Variance monitor, detecting shortlist drift. Given the inherent volatility that I've documented, we need some kind of flag if the AI tool suddenly starts behaving very differently, or if its output consistently degrades over time. The third, a shadow audit set. This is about inserting a set of, say, 20 known CVs with predetermined ideal outcomes and specific characteristics that you want to track into every batch of CVs that you screen using AI. By consistently tracking how the AI handles these, you can effectively spot those deviations. And fourth, human override. This is a fundamental compliance safeguard and an ethical imperative. The minimal action here, and it's truly minimal for such a critical function, is to ensure that recruiters sign off on any auto reject. Absolutely no candidate should be definitively moved from consideration by a purely automated process. So there's more listed in the report, but these are all about building a robust safety net and an ongoing validation process around the AI. So we've talked about bringing that all together: programmatic API calls, structured prompts, some of those ML ops, shadow audit CVs, and variance monitoring are probably 4 of the most important things to start thinking about. And very quickly, I know we're struggling for time. My fault for waffling on so much, but just a quick summary of what we've talked about today. We've got into detail on the findings of this experiment. The very first conclusion, and the one that really sets the tone for understanding that current landscape, stated quite directly here: I measured the dream and I found the glitch. What exactly is that dream? It's the compelling and widely promoted vision that LLMs promise recruiter grade consistency at machine speed. It's a powerful narrative, often presented by vendors, LinkedIn AI experts, even ChatGPT itself. If you ask it, if you prompt it what you can use ChatGPT for in recruitment, top of the list: screening resumes. the independent field experiment that I carried out actually found that when I tested this dream against the reality, they agree with each other barely 1 resume in 7 and reshuffle their rankings overnight. Okay. Building directly on that, the second key conclusion addresses that profound and serious nature of the instabilities that we meticulously documented throughout this presentation. Volatility is not a cosmetic flaw; it's a legal and ethical fault line. And you can see here, tomorrow's citation-worthy model will rank the same resume consistently and explain why in verifiable terms. That's what we need to be aiming for. And that final takeaway: proceed with informed caution. Deploy AI at the speed of innovation, govern it at the speed of risk. Treat LLMs as you would a brilliant but erratic apprentice. Let them draft, sift, and summarize, but never let them sign the offer letter without human review. Okay, so that concludes the main presentation of my findings from this. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I know we've only got a couple of minutes, but I'd be happy to open the floor and take any questions if you do. I don't think you can come on audio, but if you do have any questions or any comments, feel free to pop them into the chat. So there's a lot to take in. I appreciate that. What I'm going to be doing is sending everybody who's registered. There's about 170 people that have registered for this today. They're going to get the recording, and you're also going to get a copy of the report that goes alongside this presentation. That should be sent out first thing tomorrow, when it's going to be published on LinkedIn as well. I do hope that this has been interesting and not just been, bombarded with information, has given you some real food for thought. I'd like to, really thank you all for attending this presentation. Like I said, I don't do webinars myself normally. Normally, I join other people's. If you haven't connected with me, please do so. Martyn Redstone, you can find me on LinkedIn. If you want to learn more about my governance, risk and compliance advisory, that is Eunomia HR.com. Feel free to take a look there, and also feel free to carry out the quick score governance assessment that you can find on the homepage there as well. Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure presenting my findings from this experiment to you. That has been my large language model reality check. I hope it's been a good reality check for you too.